Each and every file in Unix is assigned 3 different ownership categories. These include user, group, and other. The user group simply represents the owner of the file. By default, whoever creates the file becomes the owner. The user group is often denoted by the lowercase u character. The category named group can hold multiple different types of users. With groups, all users belonging to the same group will have similar permissions when accessing a file. Instead of changing permissions for hundreds of individual users, adding them all to the same group and changing group permissions accordingly is an effective way to manage multiple user accounts. The group category is usually denoted by a lowercase g character. Lastly, users belonging to the other group are typically thought of as everyone else trying to access a file, meaning they didn't create the file in question, nor did they belong to the group who could own the file. The other group is often denoted using a lowercase o character. With the 3 ownership groups discussed above, being able to limit how these groups interact with files is where the concepts of permissions come into play. For each ownership group, Unix assigns 3 different types of permissions: read, write, and execute. Read permissions give the special authority to open and thus read a file. For a directory, this entails being able to list its contents. Write authorizes the modification of a file. On directories, the removal, addition, and or renaming of a file is granted. Lastly, having execute permissions refers to an ownership group being granted the ability to execute a file like a script or program. Like ownership categories, file permissions are sometimes denoted by specific characters, with read permissions being denoted by the lowercase r character, write permissions being denoted by the lowercase w character, and execute permissions being denoted by the lowercase x character. In bringing this all together, there are 3 ownership types: user, group, and other. Each ownership type contains 3 permissions: read, write, and execute. Each file or directory in the Unix file system is assigned all 3 of these ownership types, with each type containing fields for each file permission. In order to see these permissions, the ls-l command will show file permissions in the first column, as well as other useful file information. While the words read, write, and execute aren't explicitly shown, they are abbreviated with the r, w, and x characters respectively. In addition, the special D character is shown at the beginning of a file's permission list to differentiate between files and directories. It's also important to note that in some places, a hyphen is shown. This suggests that there is no permission for that specific ownership group on a file. Being able to change certain permissions is also a very important tool for Unix users, ultimately giving them total control over who and what their users can do with their files. In order to change a file permission, we need to use the change mod command. There are 2 ways to change a file permission, either through absolute or symbolic mode. In absolute mode, the permissions themselves are represented not by characters, but by 3-digit octal numbers. Take, for example, the command changemod 755 on a file named file.txt. This gives the user ownership group read, write, and execute permissions, while both group and ownership groups only get read and execute permissions for file.txt. In a similar fashion, the command changemod 644 file.txt gives user ownership group read and write permissions, while both group and other ownership groups only get read permissions for file.txt. Contrastingly, with symbolic mode, you use mathematical symbols to modify file permissions. Using the plus character as a permission, using the hyphen or minus character removes a permission, and an equal sign character sets permissions while overriding any earlier permissions. To target specific ownership groups, you can use the U, G, O, and A for user, group, other, and all respectively. Let's look at some examples. The command changemod u plus rw file.txt gives the user ownership group read and execute permissions for file.txt. Changemod g-x file.txt removes execute permissions from group for file.txt. As an ending note, if you ever wanted to change the direct owner of a file or a group for a file, change own and change group will do the job. Change own will change the file's new owner, whereas change group will change the owner's group. In order to execute these commands, you may need to elevate your user privileges using the sudo command before the command call. For example, sudo change own root file.txt. Let's look at an example together. Let's say we had a file named file.txt and we wanted to change the owner of the file from student to root. In order to do this, we can use the command sudo change own root file.txt to change the owner from student to root. Similarly, if you wanted to change the group owner from student to root, we can do sudo change group root file.txt.